Blood dripped from King Alaric Stone's fingertips onto the frozen ground. Around him, the bodies of 7 massive creatures lay scattered across the moonlit clearing. Their black fur was matted with blood, and their fanged muzzles were frozen in final snarls. These were not ordinary wolves. They were shadow beasts, dark creatures sent from beyond the veil, and they had been hunting him for days. Alaric knelt beside a small stream that cut through the forest at the northern border of his kingdom. The water reflected his face in the silver moonlight. At 45, he still appeared formidable, with a strong jawline shadowed by a salt and pepper beard, and eyes that glowed with an unnatural amber light. Those eyes marked him as what he truly was, an Alpha Therian, the most powerful of the wolf-shifters who had ruled the kingdom of Lunaris for generations. He dipped his wounded hands into the stream, watching as the water around his fingers turned black rather than red. The corruption was spreading. With each passing month, the curse grew stronger within him. What had once been confined to his touch now seeped into everything around him. As his blood touched the water, the stream itself began to darken. Fish floated to the surface, bellies up, and the reeds along the bank withered. Alaric withdrew his hands with a growl of frustration. Even the simple act of cleaning his wounds brought death. "My king," a voice spoke from the trees behind him. "The castle awaits your return. The council grows restless." Thomas, his most trusted advisor, emerged from the shadows. Though 70 years old, the man moved with the quiet grace of someone who had spent a lifetime in royal service. His weathered face showed no reaction to the circle of death surrounding his king. "How many more were spotted at the western border?" Alaric asked, wiping his hands on a cloth rather than returning them to the now tainted water. 3 packs, your majesty. They move under the cover of darkness, but our scouts report they are heading toward the capital. Thomas surveyed the dead shadow beasts. "They grow bolder. Never before have they ventured this far into your territory." "She grows stronger." Alaric's voice was grim. "Ravenna. After 20 years of silence, she stirs again." Thomas nodded solemnly. "And the queen awaits you tonight, as is customary." Alaric's expression hardened. The monthly visit. The charade he maintained for the sake of his kingdom, for the succession, for the woman he had married but never truly claimed. Queen Seraphina would come to his chambers tonight, as she had done every full moon for the past 7 years, and once again he would not be there to meet her. Not truly. "Prepare the sleeping draught," Alaric commanded, rising to his feet. The blood-stained snow beneath his boots withered and turned gray, decay spreading outward in a perfect circle around him. "Double the strength this time." "My king," Thomas hesitated, his loyalty warring with concern. "The queen grows increasingly distressed by your absence," the court whispers. "They say she cannot give you an heir because—" "Because I am cursed," Alaric snarled, his eyes flashing dangerously. "Because everything I touch withers and dies." "Would you have me touch her, Thomas? Would you have me watch the life drain from her eyes as my curse takes her?" The old advisor lowered his gaze. "No, your majesty." "Then prepare the draft. I ride for the castle immediately." As they mounted their horses, Alaric felt the familiar ache in his chest. The bond, the soul connection he had felt from the moment he first saw Seraphina, pulled at him. Even now, miles away, he could sense her preparation for their meeting. Her hope, stubbornly persistent despite 7 years of disappointment, called to him across the distance. He had known from the first moment he saw her that she was his soulmate. The legends spoke of such connections among the Therians, rare and powerful bonds that transcended ordinary marriage. But what should have been his greatest blessing had become his deepest torment. The curse ensured that the one woman who could complete his soul was the one woman he could never touch. The castle of Lunaris rose before them as they exited the forest, its silver towers gleaming in the moonlight. Unlike the decaying woodland they left behind, the castle stood proud and strong, a beacon of hope for the kingdom. Alaric had ensured that his curse remained his secret burden, shared only with Thomas and a handful of trusted guards. To his people, he was still the powerful Alpha King who protected them from threats beyond their borders. They did not know that their greatest threat was their king himself. As they approached the gates, Alaric noticed the withered plants that lined the road, evidence of his passing from weeks before. The corruption was spreading faster now, lingering longer. Soon, not even the castle would be immune to his touch. "My king," Thomas said quietly as they dismounted in the courtyard. "There may yet be a way to break the curse. The ancient texts speak of soul bonds that could overcome even the darkest magic." "We have searched for 20 years," Alaric replied, his voice weary with the weight of hope repeatedly crushed. "Every shaman, every mystic, every dusty tome in the library. The answer remains the same. Only when the soulmate accepts sacrifice will the curse be broken. I will not sacrifice Seraphina to save myself." "Perhaps the sacrifice is not what you believe it to be," Thomas suggested. But Alaric was already striding toward the castle doors, his black cloak billowing behind him. The guards snapped to attention as he passed, careful not to touch him. They had been told that their king followed the ancient warrior custom of allowing only family to make physical contact, a convenient explanation for his careful isolation. In his chambers, Alaric found the sleeping draft waiting on a silver tray. The amber liquid caught the firelight, innocent-looking despite its purpose. Beside it lay a pair of silver gloves, meticulously crafted with ancient runes etched into the metal. These allowed him minimal contact with objects without immediately corrupting them, though their protection was limited and temporary. Alaric removed his riding gloves, revealing hands crisscrossed with black veins, evidence of the curse that flowed through his blood. He flexed his fingers, watching as the skin around his knuckles cracked slightly, revealing glimpses of darkness beneath. The corruption was advancing faster than ever before. Donning the silver gloves, he lifted the vial of sleeping draught. 7 years of monthly deception. 7 years of breaking Seraphina's heart while trying desperately to protect her. 7 years of ruling a kingdom while watching it slowly die around him. "Forgive me," he whispered before downing the contents. The effect was immediate. A heavy weight pressed against his consciousness, dragging him toward oblivion. He barely managed to remove the gloves and place them in their protected box before collapsing onto his bed. As darkness claimed him, his last thought was of Seraphina's face, the hope in her eyes that would once again be extinguished by morning. In her own chambers across the castle, Queen Seraphina prepared for her monthly visit to the king's quarters. Her lady's maid adjusted the ivory silk of her nightgown, the fabric whispering against her skin like a ghost. After 7 years of marriage, she had grown accustomed to feeling like a ghost in her own life, seen but untouched, present but not acknowledged. At 26, Seraphina remained as beautiful as the day she had first arrived at court. Her golden hair fell in soft waves to her waist, and her emerald eyes still sparkled with intelligence and kindness. But tonight, as with every full moon, those eyes also held the fragile light of hope that refused to die completely. "You look beautiful, Your Majesty," her maid said softly. "Tonight will be different. I can feel it." Seraphina's reflection stared back, with eyes that had learned not to hope too fervently. 7 years of walking to her husband's chambers once a month with her heart fluttering like a caged bird, only to return at dawn with that same heart a little more bruised. "Yes, perhaps it will," she murmured, forcing a smile. What else could she say? That she'd stopped truly believing in different somewhere around the 3rd year of her marriage? The door burst open, and her sister Isolde swept in, carrying a small vial of amber liquid. Where Seraphina had inherited their mother's golden hair and quiet composure, Isolde was all fire, dark curls, flashing eyes, and opinions she never bothered to contain. "I brought you something," Isolde announced, her voice filling the quiet room. "It's a fertility tonic from the Southern Covens." Seraphina sighed. "I don't need—" "You've been trying for 7 years, Sarah. 7 years." Isolde's eyes shone with fierce protectiveness. "The court whispers. They say you're—" "I know what they say," Seraphina interrupted firmly. She'd heard it in corridors, seen it in pitying glances, felt it in the way conversation died when she entered rooms where noble ladies gathered with their children. They called her the Barren Queen. And why wouldn't they? After 7 years, she hadn't yet given the kingdom an heir. She watched those other women, the way they cradled their babies, the casual ease with which they adjusted a blanket or soothed a cry, such simple gestures that looked like magic to her, an impossible forbidden gift. "Then let me help you prove them wrong." Isolde squeezed her hand. "Please, you'd be such a wonderful mother, Sarah. I see how you are with the children in the village." "Stop," Seraphina said sharply, then softened her voice. "Thank you." She couldn't tell her sister the truth, that no amount of fertility magic could fix a marriage that had never been consummated. The problem wasn't her womb, but the 10 feet of careful distance her husband maintained between them at all times. Serafina couldn't explain the confusion and hurt she carried alone for the sake of their reputation, for the kingdom. The shame of remaining as untouched by the king as the day she'd wed him. "Thank you," she said finally, tucking the vial away. Her maid appeared with a robe. "It's time, Your Majesty." Serafina stood, squaring her shoulders. 7 years had taught her many things, but perhaps the most valuable was this: dignity could be worn like armor. The walk to the king's chambers felt longer each month. Through the portrait gallery, past the corridor where moonlight spilled through tall windows, and worst of all, past a nursery that remained cruelly empty. Tonight she paused in the doorway, imagining it filled with life, her heart beating too fast. For what if tonight was different? What if her husband was waiting? What if he looked at her, reached for her? What if tonight was the night she finally got to become a mother? She crushed the thought before it could take root. She'd been 19 when they'd married, terrified and foolish enough to hope. When Alaric had taken her hand during the ceremony, for one breathless moment, she'd felt a pull, a recognition, something that whispered, "Mate." Then he'd released her hand and escorted her to her chambers. "Our marriage serves its purpose," he'd said, voice cold. "The alliance is secured. That is enough." But it wasn't enough. Not for the kingdom that needed an heir. Not for the wedding contract that stipulated they'd try. Not for her heart, which had somehow decided to want impossible things. A husband who looked at her like she mattered, and a child to love with every piece of herself. And so, as per the marriage agreement, once a month, she would come to his chambers. Except they never truly tried. Something always prevented it. Serafina reached the king's chambers and paused, her palm pressed flat against the heavy oak door. Behind this door lay her husband, and the thought stirred something within her, a longing she couldn't fully suppress despite years of disappointment. Tonight would be no different, she knew that, and yet something close to hope beat its wings dangerously against her ribs. Not hope for his love. She'd buried that dream long ago, but hope for a child she couldn't let go of. Serafina opened the door. The king's chambers were dark except for dying embers in the fireplace. Heavy curtains blocked the moonlight, casting everything in shades of shadow. "Your Majesty." Her voice came out softer than intended, almost tentative. Silence, but not the heavy silence of emptiness. Someone was here. She could feel it, an awareness that prickled along her skin. Whenever Alaric was near, she felt this strange pull, this awareness that seemed almost supernatural in its intensity. Her bare feet whispered across thick carpets as she moved deeper into the room. She could make out the massive four-poster bed against the far wall, its curtains drawn. With each step, her awareness of Alaric's presence grew stronger, his scent wrapping around her like a physical touch, wild and clean and utterly male, filling her lungs until she felt lightheaded. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached the bed. She could hear breathing now, deep and even. "Please," she thought, "please just let this work. I don't need you to love me. I just need—" Serafina drew back the curtain, hope and dread warring in her throat. Alaric lay on his back, chest rising and falling in the deep rhythm of sleep. Moonlight filtering through a gap in the curtains painted him in silver and shadow. The hard planes of his face, the dark sweep of his lashes, the strong column of his throat. Even deep in sleep, he looked like a king, powerful, untouchable, hers in name only. "Alaric," she spoke louder this time, leaning over him. Nothing, not even a flutter of his eyelids. Serafina swallowed against the hurt rising in her throat. Maybe he was simply exhausted, but then her foot struck something on the floor. She looked down and saw a small glass vial lying on its side by the bed, empty. Frowning, she bent slowly and brought it to her nose. Then she froze. A sleeping draught. Her husband had drugged himself rather than be awake when she arrived. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. Serafina gripped his shoulder and shook hard, harder than she'd ever dared touch him before. "Alaric, wake up!" His head lolled slightly, but his eyes remained closed. Whatever he'd taken had pulled him deep under. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm your wife. I'm your wife. And you drug yourself unconscious rather than—" Her voice broke as she stared at his sleeping face. 7 years of rejection crystallized into this moment of clarity. He didn't just not love her. He actively avoided her, to the point of drugging himself unconscious rather than facing her once a month. "I don't need your love," she said softer now. "I know what this marriage is, but I deserve the truth. Why can't you at least give me that?" Tears slid down her cheeks as anger and hurt battled within her. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. It was the first time she had touched him so intimately, and only because he was unconscious. "What are you afraid of?" she whispered. Her gaze traveled around the room, seeing it with new eyes. Something about this space felt wrong, controlled, contained. Even in sleep, Alaric seemed to hold himself rigid, as if afraid of what? A strange impulse took hold of her. If he wouldn't give her answers, perhaps she could find them herself. She began to search the room methodically, looking for anything that might explain his behavior. His desk yielded nothing unusual. Correspondence about border patrols, reports from village magistrates, the ordinary business of kingship. The massive bookshelf contained histories and battle strategies, nothing personal. The wardrobe held immaculately arranged clothing, each item precisely placed. Serafina was about to give up when she noticed something odd about the stone fireplace. The carved wolf heads that adorned the corners seemed to be watching her, their eyes catching the faint firelight. Acting on instinct, she pressed her palm against one of the wolves. To her astonishment, a section of the wall beside the fireplace slid open silently, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Her heart pounding, Serafina glanced back at the sleeping king before stepping into the secret room. Unlike the austere main chamber, this space was cluttered with artifacts, ancient texts, and strange objects. The walls were covered with maps marked with areas of spreading darkness, and charts tracking the phases of the moon. But what caught her attention was a large painting that dominated one wall. It depicted a fearsome wolf-man hybrid, Aetherian in full transformation, with one hand extended toward a kneeling woman. Where their fingertips nearly touched, darkness spread from the Therian's hand, while light emanated from the woman's. Around them, ancient symbols formed a circle, and at the bottom of the painting, words in the old language had been carefully transcribed. Serafina traced the symbols with her fingers, translating in her mind. Soul bound in darkness, soul bound in light. Only through sacrifice will the curse take flight. A curse, was that what this was about? On a table beneath his painting lay an open book, its pages yellowed with age. Beside it rested a pair of silver gloves, intricately etched with the same symbols from the painting. Serafina picked up one of the gloves, feeling its strange weight, the metal surprisingly warm to the touch. The book showed detailed diagrams of the human body, with dark veins spreading through the subject's arms and hands. Notes in Alaric's precise handwriting filled the margins, charting the progression of something called the corruption. With growing horror, Serafina began to understand. The isolation, the distance, the refusal to touch her. It wasn't rejection at all. It was protection. A noise from the main chamber startled her. Clutching the silver glove, she hurried back through the hidden door, just as Alaric began to stir on the bed. The sleeping draft was wearing off earlier than expected. Without thinking, Serafina slipped the glove onto her right hand. If her suspicions were correct, if Alaric truly was cursed so that his touch brought death, perhaps the glove would protect her. She approached the bed as Alaric's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his face as he saw her standing over him. "Serafina?" His voice was rough with sleep, but his eyes widened in alarm when he realized she was truly there. He immediately moved away, pressing himself against the headboard. "You shouldn't be here. The draft, it was supposed to last until morning." "I found this," she said calmly, holding up her gloved hand. "And I found your secret room. I know about the curse, Alaric." The color drained from his face. For a long moment, he stared at her in silence, a storm of emotions crossing his features. Fear, shame, resignation, and something else, something that looked almost like longing. "Then you know why I cannot be near you," he finally said, his voice low and pained. "Why I've kept this distance between us." "Is it true?" she asked. "Does your touch bring death?" Rather than answer, Alaric reached toward the bedside table, picking up a small potted plant. Before her eyes, the leaves began to wither and blacken, crumbling to dust within seconds. "Everything I touch," he said quietly, "everything I care for, withers and dies. The plants, the animals, the very land itself. The curse ensures I bring only death." "How long?" Serafina asked, her mind reeling with the implications. "How long have you lived with this?" 20 years, he replied. Since before we met, since before we married. Why didn't you tell me? The hurt in her voice was unmistakable. 7 years, Alaric. 7 years of thinking you found me repulsive, unworthy. Repulsive? Genuine shock crossed his face. Is that what you thought? He laughed bitterly. Serafina, from the moment I saw you, I knew you were my soulmate. The one person in all the world meant for me. The cruelest joke of this curse is that it gave me the perfect match only to ensure I could never touch you without killing you. The revelation stunned her. Soulmate, like in the old legends? The Therian bloodlines still carry the ancient magic, Alaric confirmed. When I took your hand at our wedding ceremony, I felt the bond form. Didn't you feel it too? That pull, that recognition? I did, she whispered, remembering the electric connection that had shot through her at his touch. But then you pulled away and never touched me again. Because the curse responded to the bond, he explained, grief evident in his voice. It recognized you as the one who could break its hold on me, and it grew stronger in your presence. That's why I had to keep my distance. Not because I didn't want you, Serafina, but because I wanted you too much. She took a step closer to the bed, her gloved hand extended. These gloves seem to protect from the curse. Is that why you wear them? Alaric nodded. They offer limited protection for brief contact with objects, but they cannot fully contain the curse for long periods or intimate contact. The silver is imbued with ancient magic, but even it fails eventually. Serafina moved closer still, determination replacing her earlier hurt. Let me try. No! Alaric's voice was sharp with fear. The risk is too great. If the glove fails, if the curse takes hold of you— 7 years, Alaric, she interrupted. 7 years of emptiness and loneliness. I deserve to at least touch my husband once with full awareness. Before he could protest further, she reached out and placed her gloved hand against his cheek. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then Alaric exhaled sharply, his eyes widening in disbelief. No darkness spread from his skin to the glove. No immediate corruption took hold. It's working, Serafina whispered, wonder in her voice. Carefully, moving as if in a dream, Alaric raised his hand and placed it over hers, pressing her palm more firmly against his face. The silver gloves seemed to glow faintly where their skin made contact through the metal. How is this possible? He murmured, leaning into her touch like a man starved for contact. Thomas and I tried the gloves years ago. They delayed the effect, but couldn't prevent it entirely. Perhaps it's because I'm your soulmate, Serafina suggested, her heart racing at this small victory. The painting in your hidden room, it showed a Therian and a woman, their hands almost touching, with darkness and light between them. Alaric's eyes sharpened. You could read the ancient text? Some of it, she admitted. My mother insisted we study the old languages, something about a sacrifice being required to break the curse. A shadow crossed Alaric's face. That's why I could never tell you. The texts are clear. Only through the soulmate's willing sacrifice can the curse be broken. I would never ask that of you. What exactly is the sacrifice? Serafina asked, still cradling his face with her gloved hand. Your life, he said simply. The curse would transfer to you, consuming you instead of me. I've searched for 20 years for another solution, consulted every mystic and shaman in the kingdom. There is no other way. A knock at the door interrupted them. Alaric pulled away from Serafina's touch, the loss of contact almost painful for both of them. Enter, he called, his voice instantly resuming its regal authority. Thomas appeared in his doorway, his eyes widening at the scene before him. The queen standing beside the king's bed, a silver glove on her hand, the king fully awake. Your Majesties, he said, bowing deeply. Forgive the interruption, but there's news from the northern border. The shadow beasts have broken through our defenses. They move toward the castle. Alaric was on his feet instantly, all tenderness gone from his expression. How many? 3 packs led by something larger. The scouts have never seen its like before. Ravenna, Alaric growled. She sends her pets to test our strength. Who is Ravenna? Serafina asked, removing the silver glove. Alaric and Thomas exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. She is the one who cursed me, Alaric finally answered. A witch of immense power who sought to use Therian magic to open doorways between worlds. When I refused to help her and defeated her in battle, she placed this curse upon me as revenge. She is also the one who can lift it, Thomas added, ignoring Alaric's sharp look. The one who casts a curse always retains the power to remove it. Then why not find her and force her to remove it? Serafina asked, the solution seeming obvious. Because she vanished 20 years ago, presumably to another realm, Alaric explained, and because any confrontation with her puts the entire kingdom at risk. Her power has only grown over time, as has yours, Thomas said quietly, though you refuse to embrace it fully. An uncomfortable silence fell at these words. Serafina sensed there was more to this exchange than she understood. "Prepare the royal guard," Alaric ordered. "I'll lead them to the northern border myself." "Your Majesty," Thomas protested, "with the curse advancing as it is, your presence on the battlefield could be exactly what we need," Alaric finished for him. "The curse brings death. Let it bring death to our enemies rather than our land." As Thomas bowed and left to carry out his orders, Serafina faced her husband, this man who had kept his distance for 7 years, not out of indifference but out of desperate love. "I'm coming with you," she declared. Alaric's expression hardened. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "I just discovered that my husband has been cursed for 20 years, that I am apparently his soulmate, and that there's a witch sending monsters to attack our kingdom," Serafina countered, her chin lifting in defiance. "I refuse to be left behind again." "Serafina, please." Alaric's voice softened. "You don't understand what these creatures are capable of, what I become when I fight them." "Then help me understand," she insisted. "No more secrets between us, Alaric. If I am truly your soulmate, then your burden is mine to share." For a long moment, Alaric studied her face, seeing the determination there, the strength he had always admired from afar. "There's more to the curse than I've told you," he finally said. "More to what I am." He moved to the center of the room, keeping a careful distance from any furniture. "The Therian bloodline carries ancient magic, the ability to shift between human and wolf forms, but the curse has corrupted that magic in me." Before Serafina's eyes, Alaric began to change. His body contorted, bones cracking as they reformed, his hands elongated into claws, black veins spreading visibly across his skin. His eyes glowed with an unholy amber light, and when he opened his mouth, his teeth had sharpened into fangs. But this was not the noble wolf transformation she had read about in the histories of the Therian kings. This was something darker, corrupted. Black fur spotted with gray spread across his skin, but it looked wrong somehow. Patchy and brittle, with the skin visible beneath appearing cracked like dried earth. Where he stood, the carpet beneath his feet began to blacken and dissolve. "This is what the curse has made of me," Alaric growled, his voice deeper, almost unrecognizable. "A harbinger of death, neither fully human nor fully wolf, but something broken between worlds." Instead of recoiling in fear as he clearly expected, Serafina stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder and sorrow. "You've carried this alone for 20 years, she said softly. With visible effort, Alaric forced himself back into human form, the transformation reversing until he stood before her as a man again, though the black veins remained visible on his skin. "Now you understand why I kept my distance," he said, "why I cannot be the husband you deserve." "No," Serafina shook her head. "Now I understand why you need me more than ever." She moved to the table where she had placed the silver glove and put it on again. With cautious steps, she approached Alaric, who watched her with a mixture of fear and longing. "The painting in your hidden room," she said. "It showed darkness flowing from the Therian to the woman, but it also showed light flowing from her to him. What if the sacrifice isn't death, but transformation? What if I'm meant to take some of your darkness while giving you some of my light?" "It's too dangerous," Alaric protested, though hope flickered in his eyes. "The texts are clear. The texts are ancient and written by people who didn't fully understand the bond between soulmates," Serafina countered. "What if we've been interpreting them wrong all these years?" Before Alaric could respond, the door burst open again. Thomas rushed in, his face pale with alarm. "The shadow beasts have breached the outer walls," he reported, breathing heavily. "They move faster than we anticipated, and they're led by something else, a woman in black robes, her skin pale as death." "Ravenna!" Alaric snarled, the name like a curse on his lips. "After 20 years, she finally shows herself." "She's asking for you specifically, Your Majesty," Thomas added. "She says she's come to collect what's hers by right." A look of grim understanding crossed Alaric's face. "The final phase of the curse. As my life force drains away, it flows to her, feeding her power." "Then we face her together," Serafina declared, standing tall beside her husband. "Soulmate to soulmate, king and queen united." For the first time in 7 years, Alaric looked at his wife not with careful distance, but with naked admiration. You truly are extraordinary, Seraphina. I've watched you from afar all these years, seen your strength, your kindness, your resilience. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning." "Yes, you should have," she agreed, a small smile curving her lips despite the danger. "But we can discuss your poor judgment after we defeat this witch." A commotion rose from the courtyard below, shouts, screams, the sounds of battle. At the window, they could see guards fighting against shadowy wolf-like creatures that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And at the center of the chaos stood a woman in flowing black robes, her hair as white as bone, her skin unnaturally pale. Even from a distance, her power was palpable, darkness swirling around her like living smoke. "Ravenna," Alaric confirmed, his expression hardening into that of a warrior king. "She hasn't aged a day in 20 years. The curse has been feeding her, keeping her young while it corrupts me and the land." "What does she want?" Seraphina asked, watching as the witch cut through the royal guards with casual flicks of her hands, darkness lashing out like whips. "What she's always wanted," Alaric replied grimly. "The power of the Therian bloodline to open doorways between worlds. With it, she could bring through an ancient being of immense power, the primal beast, destroyer of realms." He turned to face Seraphina, decision made. "Stay here. I'll face her alone." "No," Seraphina's response was immediate. "We face her together or not at all." Alaric was about to protest when a voice spoke directly in their minds, bypassing the physical distance between them and the courtyard below. "The Alpha King and his untouched queen." Ravenna's voice was silken poison, seeping into their thoughts. "How touching that you finally discovered the truth after all these years. Come down and face me, Alaric Stone, or watch as I tear your castle apart stone by stone." Alaric's hands clenched into fists, black veins pulsing visibly beneath his skin. "She won't stop until she has what she wants." "And what exactly is that?" Seraphina asked, her mind racing to understand the full scope of what they faced. "The essence of the Alpha," Thomas answered when Alaric remained silent. "The purest form of Therian magic, passed down through the royal bloodline for generations. With it, Ravenna could tear open the veil between worlds." "There's something you're not telling me," Seraphina said, studying both men's faces. "What is the essence of the Alpha? How does she extract it?" After a moment's hesitation, Alaric answered. "Through ritual sacrifice. The Alpha must be willingly given to her power or taken at the moment of greatest vulnerability." "And when is an Alpha most vulnerable?" she pressed. "When the soul bond is fully formed," Thomas said quietly. "When the Alpha joins with his true mate." Understanding dawned on Seraphina's face. "That's why you never consummated our marriage, not just because of the curse, but because it would make you vulnerable to her." Alaric nodded grimly. "The moment our bond fully activates is the moment I would be most powerful and most vulnerable. Ravenna has waited 20 years for this opportunity." Another mental assault from the witch below made them all wince. "I grow impatient, Alaric," Ravenna's voice echoed in their minds. "Perhaps I should motivate you?" A scream rose from his courtyard as one of the guards was enveloped in darkness, his body withering before their eyes until nothing remained but dust. "She's growing stronger by the minute," Thomas warned, "feeding on the life force of everyone she kills." "We need a plan," Seraphina insisted. "There must be a way to use the bond against her rather than let her use it against us." Alaric's eyes widened slightly. "The soul ritual. It's dangerous, nearly forgotten. But if we could establish the bond on our terms rather than hers." "What ritual?" Seraphina asked. "An ancient Therian ceremony to formalize the soul bond," Thomas explained. "It would create a connection between you that transcends physical touch." "But it requires physical contact," Alaric added, the conflict clear on his face. "Prolonged contact that the silver gloves might not withstand." "I'll take that risk," Seraphina said without hesitation. "You don't understand." Alaric's voice grew urgent. "If the gloves fail during the ritual, the curse wouldn't just kill you. It would corrupt your very soul. You'd be bound to me in darkness for eternity." "And if we do nothing?" she challenged. "Ravenna kills everyone in the castle, takes your power anyway, and destroys our kingdom?" More screams rose from below, the sounds of battle intensifying. They were running out of time. "The ritual chamber," Thomas said suddenly, "in the catacombs beneath the castle. It's protected by ancient magic that might help contain the curse during the ceremony." "Go," Alaric ordered. "Prepare the chamber. We'll be right behind you." As Thomas hurried away, Alaric turned to his wife, 7 years of longing and regret in his eyes. "Seraphina, if you do this, there's no going back. The bond once formed is permanent, and if something goes wrong—" "I've been your wife in name only for 7 years," she interrupted, placing her gloved hand over his heart. "Let me finally be your true mate for whatever time we have left." For the first time since their wedding day, Alaric allowed himself to truly look at his queen, not with careful restraint, but with all the love and desire he had suppressed for years. In that moment, something shifted between them, the first tendrils of the bond strengthening even without physical touch. "Together, then," he said softly. Below in the courtyard, Ravenna tilted her head back, sensing the change in the energy above her. A cruel smile spread across her bloodless lips. "At last," she whispered, "the game truly begins." From the shadows and the edge of the courtyard, Isolde watched the witch's smile with growing dread. The tonic she had given her sister earlier wasn't just a fertility potion. It was an ancient concoction passed down through their mother's line, designed to awaken dormant magic. Magic that Seraphina would need if she were to survive what was coming. Clutching an amulet around her neck, Isolde whispered words in the old language, feeling the power stir within her own blood. She had hidden her abilities for years, knowing how those with magic were feared in the kingdom. But tonight, her sister would need every advantage. "Mother," she whispered to the night sky, "guide her through what comes." As Alaric and Seraphina prepared to face their greatest challenge, the bond between them, dormant for 7 long years, began to awaken, unaware that their union was exactly what their enemy had been waiting for all along. Ancient stone stairs spiraled deep beneath Lunaris Castle, each step worn smooth by centuries of use. Seraphina descended carefully, one hand tracing the damp wall for balance, while the other clutched a silver lamp that cast long shadows through the narrow passage. The silver glove gleamed in the lamplight, its protective runes catching the glow as if alive with power. Thomas led the way, his aged frame moving with surprising agility through the twisting corridors of the catacombs. Behind Seraphina came Alaric, maintaining a precise distance that had become second nature over 7 years of careful separation. "The ritual chamber was built by the first Therian kings," Thomas explained, his voice echoing against the stone. "A sacred space where Alpha rulers could commune with their ancestors and perform the most powerful magic of our kind." "How many have performed the soul bond ritual here?" Seraphina asked, her breath visible in the chill air. "None in living memory," Thomas admitted. "The practice fell out of favor generations ago, when Therian rulers began making political marriages rather than following the call of true soul bonds." "Then how can we be certain it will work?" Seraphina glanced back at Alaric, whose face remained impassive, despite the tension evident in every line of his body. "We cannot," Alaric answered simply, "but it offers our best chance against Ravenna." Above them, the sounds of battle penetrated even the thick stone of the catacombs. Muffled screams and the thunderous impact of magic against the castle walls created an ominous backdrop to their desperate journey. "She will break through the outer defenses soon," Thomas warned as they reached the bottom of the stairs. "The royal guards fight bravely, but her shadow beasts are unlike anything they have faced before." "Then we must hurry," Alaric said, the black veins on his hands pulsing visibly with each distant crash that shook the castle foundations. Thomas approached a circular door carved with intricate wolf designs. Ancient runes spiraled from the edges toward a central keyhole shaped like a paw print. The old advisor reached into his robes and withdrew a silver medallion stamped with the royal crest of Lunaris. "Only those of royal Therian blood can open this door," he explained, offering the medallion to Alaric. "It requires both the key and the essence of the Alpha." Alaric hesitated, looking down at his corrupted hands. "My blood may taint the magic that protects this place." "The chamber was built to contain Therian power in all its forms," Thomas said. "Even corrupted, your blood remains royal." With visible reluctance, Alaric took the medallion. Using one sharp nail, he pierced his thumb, allowing a drop of black blood to fall onto the silver surface. The blood sizzled against the metal, and for a moment, Seraphina feared it would corrupt the ancient key. Instead, the blackness seemed to be absorbed into the medallion itself, causing the silver to pulse with an eerie light. Alaric placed the medallion into the paw print indentation. Immediately the door began to respond, ancient mechanisms grinding to life. The runes illuminated one by one, spiraling inward as the massive stone disk rolled aside, revealing a chamber beyond. "Quickly," Thomas urged, ushering them through the doorway. Once inside, the chamber's protections should shield us from Ravenna's awareness, at least temporarily. The ritual chamber opened before them, a perfectly circular space with a domed ceiling that seemed to capture and amplify the light from their lamp. At the center stood a raised dais of polished black stone, surrounded by a ring of silver inlaid into the floor. The walls were covered with elaborate murals depicting the history of the Therian people, from their origins as protectors of the boundary between worlds to their evolution into the royal bloodline of Lunaris. "It's beautiful," Seraphina whispered, her eyes drawn to a particular mural showing a Therian king and queen with their hands joined, light emanating from their union. "This place holds the collective power of every Therian ruler who came before," Thomas said, moving quickly to prepare the ritual space. From a hidden alcove, he retrieved silver bowls, ancient texts, and ceremonial daggers adorned with wolf heads. "What exactly does the ritual entail?" Seraphina asked, watching as Thomas arranged the items on the dais. "The soul bond exists naturally between true mates," Thomas explained, lighting ceremonial candles that burned with unusual silver flames. "The ritual doesn't create it so much as formalize it, strengthening what already exists between you." "And how is this accomplished?" Alaric asked, keeping his distance from the preparations, aware that his touch could corrupt the ceremonial objects. "Through the mingling of blood and the speaking of ancient vows," Thomas replied, opening a weathered tome to a marked page. "But most importantly, through prolonged physical contact during the recitation. Your essences must flow between you, finding balance." Seraphina glanced down at her gloved hand. "And the silver gloves? Will they prevent the necessary connection?" Thomas's expression grew grave. "The gloves may interfere with the ritual's full potency, for the bond to form completely." He hesitated, looking between them. "We would need direct contact," Alaric finished, the implications hanging heavy in the air. "Skin to skin." "Yes," Thomas confirmed. "But perhaps, given the circumstances, a partial bonding through the protection of the gloves would be sufficient to—" A tremendous crash echoed from above, causing dust and small stones to rain down from the chamber ceiling. The candles flickered wildly, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. "She's broken through the main defenses," Alaric growled, his eyes flashing amber. "We have no more time for hesitation." He strode to the dais, his royal bearing evident despite the corruption that marked his skin. "Prepare the ritual, Thomas. We proceed as the ancient texts dictate, without compromise." "But Your Majesty," Thomas protested, "direct contact could kill me," Seraphina said calmly, removing the silver glove from her right hand. "I understand the risk. I accept it." Thomas looked between them, recognizing the futility of further argument. With a deep bow, he began the final preparations, arranging the silver bowls and ceremonial daggers on the dais. "Stand facing each other," he instructed, positioning Alaric and Seraphina on opposite sides of the dais. "The silver circle will help contain the curse's power during the ritual, though it cannot nullify it completely." Another crash from above, closer this time. Small fissures appeared in the ceiling, ancient dust filtering down through beams of light. "She's searching for you," Thomas warned. "The chamber's protections will not hold against her direct assault for long." "Then we begin now," Alaric said, his voice taking on the formal tones of ritual. He stepped onto the dais, careful to remain on his side of the circle. Seraphina followed, standing opposite her husband. For 7 years they had maintained a careful distance. Now, separated by mere feet, the air between them seemed charged with possibility and danger. Thomas opened the ancient tome, his voice steady as he began to recite in the old language. The words echoed in the chamber, each syllable seeming to awaken something in the very stones around them. "The ritual requires blood freely given," Thomas explained during a pause in the recitation. "Each of you must make an offering to the other." He handed Seraphina one of the ceremonial daggers, its silver blade gleaming in the candlelight. Alaric required no blade. His transformed nails were sharp enough to pierce his own skin. "As you make the offering," Thomas continued, "focus your thoughts on what binds you together, the connection you felt from the first moment, the bond that has persisted despite 7 years of separation." Seraphina held the dagger above her palm, her eyes locked with Alaric's. In his gaze, she saw fear, not for himself, but for her, and behind that fear, a desperate hope. "I do this willingly," she said clearly, drawing the blade across her palm. Red blood welled in the shallow cut, bright against her pale skin. Across from her, Alaric extended his hand, using one sharp nail to slice his own palm. Black blood, corrupted by the curse, oozed from the wound. The contrast between her vibrant red and his tainted black could not have been starker. "Now join your hands," Thomas instructed. "Blood to blood, essence to essence." This was the moment of greatest danger. Seraphina's ungloved hand, bleeding freely, extended toward Alaric's corrupted touch. If the ritual failed, if the chamber's protections were insufficient, her life would end in that instant. Alaric hesitated, his hand hovering inches from hers. "Seraphina," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "if this fails—" "Then I die having truly been your wife, if only for a moment," she replied, her voice unwavering. "Better that than a lifetime of empty distance." Before he could protest further, she closed the gap between them, pressing her bleeding palm firmly against his. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Where their blood mingled, a blinding light erupted, shooting upward in a column that illuminated the entire chamber. The silver circle around the dais flared to life, containing the energy that threatened to explode outward. Seraphina gasped as sensation flooded through her. She could feel Alaric's essence pouring into her through their joined hands, dark and powerful and ancient. The curse pushed against her life force, seeking to corrupt and destroy. But something else flowed with it, something that had nothing to do with the curse. Alaric himself, his true self beneath the corruption, his soul reaching for hers. For Alaric, the experience was equally profound. Seraphina's essence flowed into him like pure light, illuminating corners of his being that had been shrouded in darkness for 20 years. Her vitality, her compassion, her unwavering strength, all of it poured into him through their joined blood, creating a connection that transcended physical touch. Thomas's voice grew more urgent as he continued the ritual, the ancient words taking on a power of their own as the bond between king and queen strengthened. The candles around the dais burned brighter, their silver flames stretching toward the ceiling. "The vows," Thomas prompted, his voice barely audible above the humming energy that filled the chamber. "Speak them now while the connection is strongest." Alaric spoke first, the formal words transformed by the raw emotion in his voice. "Blood of my blood, soul of my soul, I bind myself to you for all time, through darkness and light, through death and beyond." Seraphina repeated the vows, her voice clear despite the pain that radiated up her arm. Where their hands joined, the curse fought against the bonding, sending waves of darkness across her skin. Black veins began to appear on her wrist, spreading slowly upward. "The corruption is transferring," Thomas warned, alarm evident in his voice. "You must complete the ritual quickly." "Together," Alaric said, his eyes locked with Seraphina's. "Speak the final binding with me." As one, they recited the last words of the ritual. "Two souls made one, one purpose shared. What darkness has divided, let light unite. What curse has broken, let love make whole." With the final word, the energy between them crested. The column of light expanded, enveloping both Alaric and Seraphina in its radiance. Within that light, something extraordinary happened. The blackness that had begun spreading up Seraphina's arm paused, then began to recede. At the same time, the corruption that had marked Alaric for 20 years seemed to lighten, the black veins becoming less prominent against his skin. Neither was fully healed, but neither was the curse transferred entirely. Instead, it seemed to be redistributing itself between them, finding a balance that neither could have achieved alone. As the light began to fade, Seraphina swayed on her feet, overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. Alaric caught her with his other hand, supporting her without breaking the connection between their bleeding palms. "It's working," Thomas marveled, watching as the curse found equilibrium between the bonded pair. "The ritual is creating balance rather than transfer." "Seraphina," Alaric's voice was tender with concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her face was pale with strain. "I can feel you," she whispered in wonder. "Not just your hand in mine, but you inside me, your thoughts, your feelings." "And I you," he replied, his thumb stroking gently over her wrist where the black veins had receded. "Your strength flows through me. Your light pushes back the darkness." The moment of connection was shattered by an explosive impact that rocked the entire chamber. Chunks of stone fell from the ceiling as the castle above them shuddered under direct assault. "She knows," Thomas said grimly, closing the ritual book. "Ravenna senses the bond forming. She comes for you now." "The ritual isn't complete," Alaric protested, maintaining his grip on Seraphina's hand. "The bond needs time to stabilize." "Time we do not have," Thomas replied, gathering the ceremonial items. "The chamber's protections are failing. You must face her now while the bond is fresh and your powers are heightened." Another impact sent more debris falling around them. A crack appeared in one of the murals, splitting the image of united Therians down the middle. "Can you stand?" Alaric asked Seraphina, his concern evident. "Yes," she replied, straightening her shoulders though her face remained pale. "The curse. I can feel it inside me, but it's not overwhelming. It's as if we're sharing the burden between us." "That is the purpose of the soul bond," Thomas explained hurriedly. "What one cannot bear alone, two bound souls can endure together." Alaric reluctantly released Seraphina's hand, both of them watching anxiously as their blood mingled on their palms. The curse did not immediately surge forward to corrupt Seraphina, nor did it retreat entirely from Alaric. Instead, it remained in the new balance they had established, distributed between them. "The physical connection is no longer necessary," Thomas observed with evident relief. "The bond persists even when you separate, a true soul bond, stronger than I dared hope." "I can feel it," Seraphina agreed, a sense of wonder in her voice, "like a cord connecting us, invisible but unbreakable." Alaric nodded, experiencing the same sensation. For 20 years, he had carried the curse alone, its weight threatening to crush him. Now that burden was shared, made bearable by the strength of the woman who had agreed to bind herself to him despite the risk. Another violent tremor shook the chamber, larger pieces of the ceiling beginning to give way. "We must go," Thomas urged, making for the circular door. "The chamber is collapsing." They fled the ancient room just as a massive section of the ceiling crashed down onto the dais where they had stood moments before. The door rolled shut behind them with a final grinding of stone on stone, sealing away the sacred space that had witnessed their union. As they hurried up the spiral stairs toward the main castle, Alaric felt a surge of power unlike anything he had experienced in 20 years. The bond with Seraphina had awakened something primal within him, something that had been dormant since the curse first took hold. "Your eyes," Seraphina gasped, looking at him as they ascended. "They've changed." Thomas glanced back, his own eyes widening. "The true alpha glow," he murmured in awe, "not seen in Lunaris for generations." Alaric couldn't see his own transformation, but he could feel it. His eyes burned with power, and his senses sharpened dramatically. He could hear the battle raging above with perfect clarity, could smell the corruption of Ravenna's magic tainting the air of his castle. "She's in the throne room," he growled, his voice deepening as his Therian nature responded to the threat. "I can sense her presence." "What of your royal guards?" Seraphina asked as they reached the top of the stairs and emerged into a castle corridor in chaos. Servants fled in all directions, and the sounds of fighting echoed from multiple directions. "Many have fallen," Alaric replied grimly, scenting the air. "The shadow beasts have spread throughout the castle, and something else, something worse accompanies them." As if summoned by his words, a massive form crashed through a nearby wall. Unlike the wolf-like shadow beasts, this creature walked upright, its body a grotesque hybrid of man and beast. Standing 9 feet tall, with the head of a bull and the scaled body of some primordial reptile, it radiated malevolence. "A chimera," Thomas breathed in horror. "Ravenna has learned to create abominations that should not exist in our world." The chimera roared, its breath visible as putrid green mist that withered the tapestries on the wall where it touched. Its eyes fixed on Alaric, recognition evident in its unnatural gaze. "She sent it specifically for you," Seraphina realized. "It can sense your alpha essence." "Get to safety," Alaric commanded, stepping forward to face the monster. "Both of you." "No," Seraphina countered firmly. "The bond means we fight together now. My strength is yours, and yours is mine." Through their newly formed connection, Alaric could feel her determination, her refusal to be left behind again. It matched his own fierce protectiveness, creating a resonance between them that amplified both emotions. "Stay behind me," he conceded, knowing further argument would be futile. "Thomas, protect the queen if I fall." The old advisor nodded grimly, drawing an ornate dagger from beneath his robes. "With my life, Your Majesty." The chimera charged, its massive hooves cracking the stone floor with each thunderous step. Alaric met its charge head-on, his body shifting as he moved. The transformation was smoother than before, less painful, as if Seraphina's essence flowing through the bond had eased the corruption's grip on his natural abilities. Black fur rippled across his skin, but now it was interspersed with strands of silver, healthier than the brittle covering the curse had previously allowed. His hands elongated into powerful claws, and his face extended into a wolf's muzzle, though he maintained his upright form and consciousness. This was not the corrupted half-transformation of before, but something closer to the true Therian form of his ancestors. The collision between Alpha and Chimera shook the corridor. Alaric's claws tore into the creature's scaled hide, drawing black ichor that smoked where it hit the floor. The Chimera bellowed in pain and rage, its bullhead lowering to gore Alaric with massive horns. Alaric sidestepped with supernatural speed, using the creature's momentum against it. As it charged past, he raked his claws down its flank, opening deep wounds that should have felled any normal beast. But the Chimera was no natural creature. It whirled with surprising agility for its size, one clawed hand catching Alaric across the chest, tearing through his royal garments and drawing blood. Seraphina gasped, feeling a phantom pain across her own chest as the bond transmitted Alaric's injury to her. Yet instead of weakening him, the shared pain seemed to distribute the damage, allowing Alaric to recover more quickly than he would have alone. "The bond makes him stronger," Thomas observed in amazement. "It allows him to heal as he fights." The Chimera charged again, but this time Alaric was ready. Drawing on power that flowed through the bond, he met the creature's charge with one of his own. Their collision cracked the stone beneath their feet, the very castle groaning under the force of their impact. Alaric's jaws closed around the Chimera's throat, his teeth sinking deep into corrupted flesh. The creature thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge him, but Alaric held fast, his claws digging into its chest, seeking the heart. With a final surge of strength, Alaric tore through bone and sinew, his claws finding the Chimera's heart and ripping it free. The creature gave one last shuddering roar before collapsing, its massive body dissolving into noxious smoke that dissipated in the castle air. Alaric stood over his fallen enemy, chest heaving, blood dripping from his muzzle and claws. He turned to Seraphina, his transformed face difficult to read, but his emotions flowing clearly through their bond: concern, triumph, and a fierce protectiveness. With visible effort, he shifted back to human form, though the amber glow remained in his eyes and the silver streaks in his hair. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice still rough from the transformation. "No," Seraphina replied, approaching him without fear, despite having witnessed his savage battle. "But you are." She reached out, touching his torn shirt where the Chimera's claws had left deep gashes. Through the bond, she could feel his pain, but also his rapid healing, accelerated by their connection. "It will heal," he assured her. "Faster now because of you." A woman's scream echoed from down the corridor, followed by the snarling of shadow beasts. The battle for the castle continued around them, despite Alaric's victory over the Chimera. "We must reach the throne room," Alaric said, his expression hardening. "Ravenna waits there, using the royal seat as a focal point for her power." "The throne rests on the oldest part of the castle," Thomas explained to Seraphina. "A nexus of natural power that the first Therian kings harnessed when building Lunaris. She seeks to corrupt that power source," Alaric growled, "to use it to open a permanent doorway between worlds." They moved through the castle corridors, encountering pockets of resistance, where royal guards fought desperately against shadow beasts. Whenever they appeared, Alaric would surge forward, his partially transformed body tearing through the shadow creatures with frightening efficiency. Each victory seemed to strengthen him further, as if the act of protecting his domain fed some primal part of his nature. Seraphina followed in his wake, marveling at the connection that allowed her to sense his every move, his every emotion. Through the bond, she could feel his growing power, but also his fear. Not for himself, but for her and for his kingdom. That fear was tempered by a new emotion, a cautious hope that had been absent in him for 2 decades. "The throne room doors," Thomas announced as they rounded a final corner and faced massive double doors carved with the royal crest of Lunaris. "They've been corrupted. The once gleaming wooden doors were now covered with a network of black veins, pulsing with the same malevolent energy that had marked Alaric's skin. From beyond them came a sickly green glow and the sound of a woman's voice chanting in an ancient, forbidden tongue. "She performs the opening ritual," Thomas said, his face pale. "If she completes it, the barrier between our world and the realm of the primal beast will be broken." Alaric approached the doors, his hand outstretched. Where his fingers touched the corrupted wood, the black veins recoiled, recognizing the source of their power. The corruption that had once been Alaric's burden alone now responded to his command, the balance established by the soul bond giving him control he had never possessed before. "Stand back," he ordered, placing both palms against the doors. Closing his eyes, he channeled power through his hands, using the curse itself against the corruption that Ravenna had spread. The doors shuddered, the black veins writhing as if in pain. Then, with a sound like breaking glass, the corruption shattered, falling away in flakes of darkness that dissolved before hitting the floor. "The bond has given you mastery over the curse," Thomas marveled. "You can command it rather than merely endure it." Alaric pushed the doors open, revealing the throne room beyond. The once magnificent hall had been transformed into a ritual space of terrible power. The floor was covered with arcane symbols, drawn in what appeared to be blood. The columns that supported the vaulted ceiling now crawled with the same black corruption that had marked the doors. And seated upon the throne itself was Ravenna. 20 years had not changed her. If anything, she appeared younger than when Alaric had last faced her, her skin unnaturally smooth and pale, her white hair floating around her head as if suspended in water. She wore robes of midnight black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and her eyes gleamed with an unholy green fire. "The Alpha King arrives at last," she said, her voice carrying easily across the vast chamber. "And he brings his queen. How touching." Shadow beasts lined the walls of the throne room, their red eyes tracking the newcomers with hungry intent. Between them and the throne stood 3 more chimeras, each more grotesque than the one Alaric had already slain. "You've desecrated my castle, murdered my people, and threatened my kingdom," Alaric growled, stepping into the throne room with Seraphina at his side. "Your quarrel is with me, Ravenna. Release the others and face me alone." The witch laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "My quarrel has never been with you, Alaric Stone. You are merely a means to an end, a key to unlock the door I have sought to open for centuries." "The primal beast," Thomas murmured from behind them. "She seeks to bring it through." "Clever old man," Ravenna smiled, her teeth unnaturally sharp. "Yes, the primal beast, the first and greatest of all shapeshifters, imprisoned between worlds when your ancestors betrayed it. With its power, I could remake reality itself." "The curse," Seraphina realized suddenly. "It was never meant to simply corrupt Alaric. It was preparation, wasn't it? You've been feeding off his essence for 20 years, gathering the power you needed for this ritual." Ravenna's smile widened. "Perceptive as well as beautiful. I can see why the Alpha chose you as his mate. Yes, the curse served 2 purposes. It weakened the barrier between worlds wherever Alaric went, creating thin spots in the veil that I could later exploit. And it funneled his considerable power to me, drop by drop, for 2 decades. And now you believe you have enough," Alaric stated, his amber eyes assessing the ritual preparations around the throne. "Almost," Ravenna replied, rising from the throne with fluid grace. "I require just one final component to complete the opening, the fully realized essence of an Alpha Therian at the moment of greatest power." Her gaze shifted to Seraphina, which, as tradition holds, occurs when the Alpha bonds completely with his true mate. Alarm flashed through Alaric as he understood Ravenna's true purpose. "The ritual in the catacombs," he growled. "You wanted us to perform it. You've been manipulating events from the beginning." "For 20 years, Ravenna confirmed with evident satisfaction. "Every sleepless night, every moment of isolation, every time you drugged yourself to avoid your lovely queen, all of it leading to this moment of desperation. When you would finally complete the bond out of necessity, creating the surge of power I require." "You underestimate the bond's strength," Seraphina said, stepping forward to stand beside Alaric. "What was meant to weaken him has made him stronger. What was meant to isolate him has given him an ally." "Brave words," Ravenna laughed, "but ultimately futile. The bond is fresh, untested. And while it may have given Alaric some control over the corruption, that control is tenuous at best. Allow me to demonstrate. With a gesture from the witch, the black veins on the columns pulsed with renewed energy. Waves of corruption radiated from them, washing over Alaric and Seraphina like a physical force. Alaric staggered as the corruption responded to Ravenna's call, the curse within him fighting against the balance the bond had established. Black veins surged across his skin, more prominent than before, reaching toward his heart. Seraphina felt it through the bond, a darkness that clawed at their connection, seeking to sever what they had only just created. Pain lanced through her as the portion of the curse she had accepted into herself responded to Ravenna's summoning, trying to return to its original host. "You see," Ravenna gloated, descending the steps from the throne. "The curse answers to me, its creator. Your charming bond may have redistributed it, but you cannot break what I have made. And now, with the power of your completed bond, I will finish what I began 20 years ago." She raised her hands, green fire dancing between her fingers. "The chimeras will hold you while I extract what I need. Try not to die too quickly, your majesties. The ritual requires a certain amount of suffering." The chimeras surged forward at her command, their misshapen bodies moving with unnatural speed. Alaric pushed Seraphina behind him, his body beginning to transform despite the pain of the resurging curse. "Thomas!" he growled through lengthening teeth. "Get Seraphina to safety!" "No!" Seraphina protested, clutching Alaric's arm. "The bond gives us strength together. Apart, we're vulnerable." Through their connection, Alaric could feel her certainty, her absolute conviction that separation would doom them both. And beneath that, a dawning realization about the nature of the bond itself, something she had glimpsed during the ritual that he had missed. "The balance," she whispered urgently. "It's not just about sharing the curse. It's about opposing forces in harmony. Your darkness, my light. Your strength, my healing." Understanding bloomed in Alaric's mind, transmitted through their connected souls. The curse had corrupted his Therian ability to transform, twisting it into something that brought only death. But Seraphina possessed the opposite quality, a natural affinity for life and healing that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "Together," he agreed, taking her hand as the chimeras closed in. The moment their fingers interlaced, power surged between them. The bond flared to life, visible now as a shimmer in the air that connected their bodies. Where Alaric's transformation had been partial before, now it completed with astonishing speed and control. His body grew larger, more powerful, but the corruption receded rather than advanced. The patchy black fur was replaced by a magnificent silver-gray coat that covered his transformed body. His eyes glowed with amber fire, and his muzzle elongated into a true wolf's visage, noble and fierce rather than twisted by corruption. Beside him, Seraphina underwent her own transformation, not into a wolf, for she had no Therian blood, but into something equally powerful. Light seemed to emanate from within her, her skin taking on an ethereal glow. Her eyes, once emerald, now shone with the same silver light that marked Alaric's fur. Where their hands joined, the light and darkness intermingled, creating a perfect balance. "Impossible," Ravenna hissed, genuine fear crossing her face for the first time. "The bond cannot manifest physically in a human mate." "She is more than human," Thomas said from behind them, his voice filled with dawning recognition. "Look at her eyes. The silver light. She carries the blood of the Soul Keepers." "Soul Keepers?" Seraphina repeated, her voice resonating with newfound power. "Ancient allies of the Therians," Thomas explained, "thought to have died out centuries ago. They were the balance to Therian might, healers and protectors of the spiritual realm." "No matter what blood she carries," Ravenna snarled, her composure fracturing, "she cannot stop what is already in motion." The witch raised her hands higher, green fire erupting from her fingertips to engulf the ritual symbols on the floor. The entire throne room began to tremble as power built within the arcane design, the very air seeming to thin as the barrier between worlds weakened. "Now!" Alaric growled, and together he and Seraphina charged. The chimeras met them head-on, their grotesque forms no less dangerous for their mismatched parts. Claws raked against Alaric's transformed body, drawing blood that now flowed red rather than black. Teeth snapped inches from Seraphina's face as she ducked beneath a swinging arm. Yet where before such wounds would have weakened them, now they seemed to fuel the bond's power. Each injury to Alaric healed almost instantly, Seraphina's newfound abilities flowing through their connection to knit flesh and restore strength. Each threat to Seraphina was met with a surge of protective fury from Alaric, his Therian abilities enhanced by the pure power of the bond. They moved as one entity, perfectly coordinated through their mental connection. When Alaric leapt to engage one chimera, Seraphina was already positioning herself to face another. When she stumbled, his arm was there to steady her without either having to speak a word. The first chimera fell beneath Alaric's claws, its throat torn out in a spray of black ichor. The second found itself impaled on an ornamental spear that Seraphina had wrenched from a wall display, her strength magnified by the bond. The third, seeing its brethren fall, hesitated just long enough for Alaric to pounce, his massive jaws closing around its skull with a sickening crunch. Throughout the battle, the shadow beasts remained against the walls, red eyes watching but not intervening. They seemed frozen in place, as if Ravenna's concentration on the ritual prevented her from commanding them as well. With the chimeras defeated, Alaric and Seraphina turned toward the throne, where Ravenna's ritual had progressed alarmingly. A swirling vortex of green energy now hovered above the royal seat, expanding steadily as the witches' chanting grew more frenzied. "We're too late," Thomas cried in dismay. "The doorway opens." Within the vortex, something massive and dark began to take form, a shape of such alien malevolence that to look upon it directly caused pain. Claws the size of swords reached from the portal, grasping at the edges, pulling them wider as the creature beyond sought entrance to the world of Lunaris. "The primal beast comes!" Ravenna exulted, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "Kneel before your true master, Therians!" "Never!" Alaric snarled, charging toward the throne with Seraphina at his side. Ravenna turned to face them, green fire erupting from her hands in deadly streams. Alaric dodged one blast, while Seraphina raised her hands instinctively. To everyone's astonishment, the silver light that surrounded her coalesced into a shield that deflected Ravenna's attack. "Soul Keeper magic," Thomas breathed in awe, awakened by the bond. Ravenna's face contorted with rage. "You cannot stop this! The ritual is complete. The door is open. The primal beast will—" Her words cut off as Alaric reached her, one massive clawed hand closing around her throat. "You have brought death to my kingdom," he growled, his transformed voice barely recognizable. "Corrupted my land, slaughtered my people, threatened my mate." "Kill me!" Ravenna choked out, a smile still playing on her lips despite her predicament. "And the door remains open. Only I can close it." "Alaric," Seraphina called urgently, "the portal grows larger. The creature is almost through." Indeed, the vortex had expanded to fill the space above the throne, and the enormous claws had gained purchase on the edges of reality itself. A head began to emerge, a nightmarish fusion of wolf, dragon, and something utterly alien, with countless eyes that burned with ancient hatred. "Only the one who opened the door can close it," Ravenna taunted, even as Alaric's grip tightened. "Kill me and your kingdom falls. Release me and perhaps I will be merciful." "There is a third option," Seraphina said, stepping forward to place her glowing hand on Alaric's arm. Through their bond, she transmitted her realization. A desperate plan formed from her newfound understanding of Soul Keeper abilities. Alaric's eyes widened as he grasped her intention. "It's too dangerous," he growled. "We have no choice," she replied, her determination flowing through their connection. "Together, remember? Your darkness, my light." With a reluctant nod, Alaric adjusted his grip, holding Ravenna immobile but no longer choking her. Seraphina stepped closer, placing her free hand against the witch's chest, directly over her heart. "What are you doing?" Ravenna demanded, fear finally breaking through her arrogance. "The curse you placed on Alaric," Seraphina said calmly, the silver light around her hand intensifying. "It creates corruption by siphoning life force, does it not? Taking from one to feed another?" "So," Ravenna spat, struggling against Alaric's grip. "So the principle works both ways," Seraphina replied, her voice taking on the resonant quality it had gained during her transformation. "As a soul keeper, I can redirect energies, not just healing, but transferring, taking from one to restore another." Understanding dawned on Ravenna's face, swiftly followed by terror. "You wouldn't dare!" "You've stolen 20 years of life from my husband," Seraphina said, her hand beginning to glow white-hot against Ravenna's chest. "Corrupted his land, his body, his very nature. Now I take it back." Power flowed from Seraphina's palm, not outward but inward, drawing rather than projecting. Ravenna screamed as the energy she had accumulated over 20 years, the power stolen from Alaric and his kingdom, began to flow in reverse. The witch's smooth skin wrinkled rapidly, her white hair thinning and falling out in clumps. Her body seemed to collapse inward as the stolen life force was ripped away, returning to its rightful owner through Seraphina's soul-keeper abilities. As Ravenna withered, Alaric grew stronger. The silver in his fur brightened, and the last traces of corruption faded from his transformed body. The bond between him and Seraphina blazed like a star, visible to all in the throne room as a bridge of light connecting their hearts. "No!" Ravenna shrieked, her voice becoming reedy and thin as her body aged decades in seconds. "The ritual! The door!" The portal above the throne began to fluctuate, its edges becoming unstable as the power that maintained it was drained away. The massive claws of the primal beast scrabbled desperately at the opening, but it was slowly contracting, forcing the creature back into the space between worlds. Ravenna's body continued to deteriorate, her stolen youth and power flowing back to their source. Her skin grew papery and translucent, revealing the bones beneath. Her eyes, once bright with malice, sank into her skull, the green fire flickering and dying. "You cannot do this," she gasped, her voice barely audible. "I am immortal." "No one is immortal," Seraphina replied solemnly. "Only balanced. Life and death, creation and destruction, light and darkness. You sought to break that balance for your own power. Now balance is restored." With a final rattling gasp, Ravenna's body crumbled to dust, the last of her stolen energy returning to Alaric and the land through Seraphina's channeling. As she collapsed, the portal above the throne imploded with a thunderous crash, sealing shut and trapping the primal beast once more between dimensions. The shadow beasts that had lined the walls dissolved instantly, the animating force that had created them vanishing with their mistress's death. The black corruption that had marred the throne room began to recede, the columns and floor returning to their natural state. Alaric and Seraphina stood in the center of the throne room, still connected by the visible manifestation of their bond, both transformed by the power they had shared and the battle they had won. "It's over," Thomas said in disbelief, approaching the royal couple cautiously. "You've defeated her." Alaric looked down at his transformed body, then at Seraphina with her glowing skin and silver eyes. "Not defeated," he rumbled, his voice still altered by his Therian form. "Balanced." Seraphina nodded, understanding flowing through their connection. The curse wasn't destroyed. It was redistributed, brought into harmony with its opposite. "Can you change back?" Thomas asked, concern evident in his voice. Alaric closed his eyes, concentrating on his human form. The transformation reversed smoothly, far easier than it had ever been before. When he opened his eyes again, he stood as a man once more, though changed from before. The black veins that had marked his skin were gone, replaced by faint silver lines that traced the same patterns. His hair, once dark, now contained streaks of silver that matched his transformed fur. Beside him, Seraphina also returned to her normal appearance, the glow fading from her skin, her eyes returning to their natural emerald. But like Alaric, she bore marks of her transformation, a streak of silver in her golden hair, and a subtle luminescence to her skin that hadn't been there before. "The bond is permanent," Thomas observed, studying them both, "as is the change it has wrought in you." "I can feel it," Seraphina agreed, touching her chest where the connection to Alaric seemed centered. "Like a cord connecting us, unbreakable." "And the curse?" Thomas asked hesitantly. Alaric extended his hand, palm up. Where before his touch had brought death, now a perfect balance had been achieved. The wood of the nearby table neither withered nor flourished at his touch. It simply remained unchanged. "Neutralized through balance," he said in wonder. "What Ravenna created as a curse, the bond has transformed into simply another aspect of my power, one that I can control rather than being controlled by." "And I can feel it too," Seraphina added, extending her own hand. A faint silver glow emanated from her palm, not the blinding light of her transformed state, but a subtle indication of her awakened soul-keeper abilities. Not as corruption, but as potential. The power to heal what was harmed, to restore what was damaged. Thomas bowed deeply to them both. "Your Majesties, I believe Lunaris is entering a new age, one that has not been seen since the first Therian kings ruled alongside Soulkeeper queens. "There will be much to rebuild," Alaric said, his gaze moving to the windows where the first light of dawn was beginning to break. "Ravenna's attack has left scars on the land and the people." "Together," Seraphina said simply, taking his hand in hers. Through the bond, she could feel his determination matching her own, his strength complementing her compassion, his fierce protectiveness balancing her nurturing nature. "Together," Alaric agreed, squeezing her hand gently. For the first time in 20 years, he could touch another being without fear of bringing death. For the first time in 7 years, he could touch his wife, his queen, his soulmate. As they stood before the throne of Lunaris, hand in hand, the first rays of the morning sun streamed through the eastern windows. The light caught the silver streaks in their hair and the subtle glow of their bond, transforming them into living symbols of the balance they had achieved. Darkness and light, strength and healing, king and queen united as they were always meant to be. Outside the castle walls, the land began to respond to the change in its rulers. Where the curse had created dead zones of withered vegetation and poisoned water, new growth began to sprout, tentative but determined. The balance that had been established between Alaric and Seraphina extended beyond them to the kingdom itself, beginning the long process of healing. In the village below the castle, a child was the first to notice the change. Looking up at the rising sun, she pointed excitedly at the castle battlements where 2 figures stood side by side, their silhouettes outlined against the morning sky. "Look!" she cried to her mother. "The king and queen! They're together!" Word spread quickly through the village, then to neighboring settlements. The king, who had been distant and isolated for so long now, stood openly with his queen. Something had changed during the night of terror and battle. Something fundamental had been healed. As the sun rose fully over Lunaris, its light revealed a kingdom wounded but not defeated, and rulers who had found in each other the balance they had each sought alone. The soul of the Wolf King had been restored. The weeks following Ravenna's defeat brought a transformation to the kingdom of Lunaris that many called miraculous. Where once dead zones had marred the landscape, tender green shoots now pushed through revitalized soil. Streams that had run black with corruption now flowed clear again, teeming with fish and water plants. The very air seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the land itself. At the center of this renewal stood King Alaric and Queen Seraphina, their bond visible to anyone who saw them together. It manifested not just in the silver streaks that now marked their hair or the faint luminescence of their skin, but in the way they moved in perfect harmony, often anticipating each other's thoughts before words were spoken. The curse that had kept them apart for 7 years had been transformed into a source of power through their balanced connection. The castle, once a place of secrets and isolation, had become a center of healing. Injured guards who had fallen during Ravenna's attack recovered under Seraphina's newly awakened Soulkeeper abilities. With a touch of her hand, wounds closed, bones knit together, and strength returned to weakened bodies. Each healing strengthened her connection to these ancient abilities, allowing her to access deeper levels of power. For Alaric, the transformation was equally profound. The corruption that had once turned his Therian abilities into instruments of death now existed in perfect balance with Seraphina's life-giving energy. He could transform at will, his magnificent silver-gray wolf form a source of awe rather than terror. Where his touch had once brought decay, now it brought neither harm nor healing, but rather stability, a neutral force that anchored the more volatile energies around him. 3 months after that fateful night in the throne room, Thomas entered the royal study where Alaric was reviewing reports from the provinces. Though the old advisor moved with the same measured dignity as always, there was an urgency in his eyes that caught Alaric's attention immediately. "What is it, Thomas?" Alaric asked, setting aside a scroll detailing the recovery of the northern farmlands. "The Queen's handmaiden has requested your presence in the royal chambers," Thomas said, his expression carefully neutral, with some urgency. Alaric was on his feet instantly, concern flaring through the bond he shared with Seraphina. He had been so absorbed in his work that he hadn't noticed any distress from her, but now that his attention shifted, he could sense something different in their connection. Not pain or fear, but a kind of wondering anticipation. He moved through the castle corridors with long strides, nodding briefly to guards and servants who bowed as he passed. The distance that had once existed between the king and his people had diminished considerably since the curse's transformation. Where before his isolation had bred mystery and fear, now his visible dedication to the kingdom's restoration had earned him genuine respect and loyalty. The doors to the royal chambers stood open, and Alaric entered to find Seraphina standing by the window, her back to him, gazing out over the recovering lands of Lunaris. Sunlight streamed through the glass, creating a halo around her golden hair with its distinctive silver streak. At the sound of his entrance, she turned, and the expression on her face stopped Alaric in his tracks. Joy, pure, undiluted joy radiated from her, flowing through their bond with an intensity that took his breath away. "Seraphina?" he questioned, crossing the room to her. "What is it?" Instead of answering with words, she took his hand and placed it gently against her abdomen. For a moment, Alaric felt nothing but the warmth of her body through the silk of her gown. Then, through their bond, he sensed it. A tiny spark of life, a new consciousness just beginning to form within her womb. "You're with child," he breathed, wonder and disbelief mingling in his voice. Seraphina nodded, happy tears shining in her eyes. "Our child, Alaric, after all these years of waiting, of hoping." Alaric gathered her in his arms, holding her with a gentleness that belied his strength. Through their bond, emotions too profound for words flowed freely between them. Gratitude, joy, and a fierce protectiveness for this new life they had created together. "I never thought," Alaric began, his voice rough with emotion. "After the curse, I believed I would never know this moment." "The balance we created made it possible," Seraphina said, her hand covering his where it still rested on her abdomen. "Life from what was once death, creation from what was corruption." Alaric knelt before her, pressing his forehead against the place where their child grew. Through the bond, he extended his awareness, trying to sense the tiny life more clearly. What he felt stunned him, not just the expected sense of new life, but something more, a familiar resonance, like an echo of their own bond. "There's something unusual about the child," he said, looking up at Seraphina with wonder rather than concern. "I can feel it through our connection. It carries both our essences in perfect balance." "A true child of the bond," Seraphina agreed, "part Therian, part Soulkeeper." "Such a union hasn't existed in centuries," Alaric marveled, rising to his feet. "Not since the first Therian kings ruled alongside Soulkeeper queens." "Thomas will know more," Seraphina suggested. "He has studied the ancient histories more thoroughly than anyone." As if summoned by this mention of his name, Thomas appeared in the doorway, bowing deeply. "Your Majesties, I take it the news has been shared." "You knew?" Alaric asked, unable to keep the smile from his face. "I suspected," the old advisor admitted. "The signs have been present for some weeks now, though only those who know what to look for would notice. The Queen's aura has changed, taking on the distinctive luminescence of a soul keeper with child." "Thomas," Seraphina said, "the child carries both our essences. We can sense it through the bond. What does this mean for the baby?" Thomas's expression grew solemn, though not worried. "If I may speak freely, Your Majesties, this child represents something unprecedented in the modern age of Lunaris. The ancient texts speak of children born of Therian and Soulkeeper unions as possessing unique abilities, the transformative power of the Therian line combined with the healing magic of the Soulkeepers." "And the curse?" Alaric asked, the concern in his voice reflected in the sudden tension through the bond. "Will it affect the child?" "The curse no longer exists as it once did," Thomas reminded him. "Through your bond with the Queen, it has been transformed, brought into balance. The child will inherit not corruption, but harmony." Relief flowed between Alaric and Seraphina, strengthening as it passed through their connection. For 7 years, the thought of a child had been both a desperate hope and a terrible fear. Hope for an heir to the throne, fear that the curse might be passed to an innocent life. Now, that fear had been replaced by a cautious wonder at what this unique child might become. "The kingdom must be told," Alaric decided. "After 7 years of waiting, our people deserve to share in this joy." "And it will further strengthen their faith in the recovery," Thomas noted pragmatically. "A royal child conceived after the defeat of Ravenna will be seen as the ultimate symbol of Lunaris's rebirth." The news spread through the castle like wildfire, and from there to the surrounding town and outlying villages. Bells rang from every tower, and spontaneous celebrations erupted in the streets. For the common folk of Lunaris, who had endured years of gradual decline as the corruption spread through their land, the promise of a royal heir represented hope in its purest form. 6 months passed, and Seraphina's belly grew round with the child within. Unlike ordinary pregnancies, hers was marked by unusual manifestations of power. On nights when the moon was full, her skin would glow with silver light, illuminating the royal chambers without the need for candles. Plants placed near her would grow at accelerated rates, flowering out of season and producing fruits of exceptional size and sweetness. And most remarkably, when she and Alaric were together, their bond would sometimes become visible to others, a shimmer in the air between them, connecting heart to heart. Alaric had never been more attentive or protective. The alpha instinct to guard his mate, always strong, had increased tenfold with her pregnancy. He spent hours each night with his hand resting on her belly, communicating with their unborn child through the bond. What he sensed from the developing life filled him with awe, intelligence, awareness, and a power that, even unformed, promised to be extraordinary. They were in the royal gardens on a warm autumn afternoon, Seraphina resting on a stone bench while Alaric paced nearby, when Thomas approached with an expression that immediately put them both on alert. "What is it?" Alaric demanded, moving to stand protectively beside his queen. "Scouts have returned from the western borders," Thomas reported, his voice low despite the privacy of the garden. "They bring disturbing news." "Speak plainly," Seraphina urged, one hand resting on her prominent belly. "They found evidence of ritual sites similar to those Ravenna used in the throne room," Thomas said. "Fresh markings, recently used." Alaric's expression darkened. "Ravenna is dead. We saw her turn to dust." "Yes, Your Majesty," Thomas agreed, "but she was not working alone." "The Dark Council," Seraphina said, recalling Ravenna's final words. "She mentioned being part of something larger." "Precisely." Thomas nodded. "The scouts found this at one of the sites." He produced a small object wrapped in protective cloth. Carefully unwrapping it, he revealed a medallion of black metal, inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. Alaric's eyes narrowed as he studied the object without touching it. "Those markings are similar to the ones from Ravenna's ritual, but different, older perhaps." "It bears the mark of the Dark Council," Thomas confirmed, "an ancient order of practitioners who seek to bring the primal beast into our world. Ravenna was but one of their number, perhaps not even the most powerful. And now they continue her work," Seraphina concluded, her hand moving protectively over her unborn child. "So it would seem, Your Majesty. The scouts report increased activity in the western mountains. Villagers speak of strange lights at night and travelers who disappear on the mountain roads." Alaric's jaw tightened. "Prepare a royal guard. I will investigate these sites myself." "No!" Seraphina said sharply, grabbing his arm. Through their bond, her fear and concern flowed clearly. "Not now. Not with the child so close to term." "All the more reason to eliminate any threat," Alaric countered, though his hand covered hers reassuringly. "If the Dark Council continues Ravenna's work, they may seek to target the child specifically. A child of our union would represent enormous power to those who serve the primal beast." Thomas cleared his throat. "If I may, Your Majesties, the Queen's concern is valid, but so is the King's. The threat cannot be ignored, but neither should the royal family be separated at this crucial time." "What do you suggest?" Alaric asked, his protective instinct warring with his duty to secure the kingdom. "Send Captain Leander with a contingent of the royal guard to investigate further," Thomas proposed. "He is your most trusted commander, and he witnessed the events in the throne room. He knows what to look for." "And what of these ritual sites?" Seraphina questioned. "Should they be destroyed?" "Not yet," Thomas cautioned. "They may provide valuable information about the Dark Council's plans. Captain Leander can document them thoroughly before taking any action." After some discussion, the plan was agreed upon. Captain Leander, a veteran warrior who had served the throne loyally for decades, would lead a select group of guards to the western mountains to investigate the disturbing findings. They would maintain regular communication through specially trained messenger hawks, ensuring that any significant discoveries were reported immediately. As the captain departed with his men the following morning, Seraphina watched from the castle battlements, her expression troubled despite the logical precautions they had taken. "What worries you?" Alaric asked, joining her as the mounted company disappeared into the western forest. "I'm not sure," she admitted, leaning into his strength as his arms circled her shoulders. "Something feels unfinished, as if Ravenna's defeat was only the beginning of a larger story." Alaric nodded, understanding flowing through their bond. "I feel it too. The balance we've achieved is powerful but precarious. If the Dark Council truly continues Ravenna's work, they will not rest until they've found a way to open the doorway to the primal beast. And our child will be born into this danger," Seraphina said softly, her hand cradling her belly. "Our child will be born into strength," Alaric corrected gently, "with the combined legacy of Therian might and Soulkeeper wisdom, and two parents who will protect it with everything they have." Through the bond, Seraphina could feel the absolute truth in his words. Alaric would die before allowing harm to come to their child. So would she. Yet the unease persisted, a shadow at the edges of her consciousness that refused to be fully banished. The weeks passed, and Seraphina's time grew near. The royal physicians and midwives prepared for the birth, though all acknowledged that this would be no ordinary delivery. A child born of the bond between an Alpha Therian and a Soul Keeper would likely come into the world with its own unique circumstances. Captain Leander's reports arrived regularly, each more concerning than the last. The ritual sites in the Western Mountains had indeed been created by members of the Dark Council. Local villagers spoke of robed figures seen in the night, performing strange ceremonies at sacred locations. Most disturbing were the accounts of children going missing from outlying farms, though none had been confirmed as abductions. "They prepare for something significant," Thomas observed, as he and Alaric reviewed the latest report in the war room. "These smaller rituals appear to be building toward a larger working." "But what could they hope to accomplish without Ravenna?" Alaric questioned, studying the map where each ritual site had been marked. "She spent 20 years preparing the opening ritual, using my curse to weaken the barriers between worlds." Thomas's expression was grave. "The Dark Council is ancient, Your Majesty. They have sought the return of the primal beast for centuries, long before Ravenna joined their ranks. If one approach fails, they simply adapt and try another." "And the missing children?" Alaric asked, his voice hardening. "I fear they may be intended as sacrifices," Thomas admitted reluctantly. "The ancient texts speak of the Dark Council using innocent blood to power their most profound rituals." Fury flashed through Alaric at the thought, his eyes momentarily glowing amber as his Therian nature responded to the threat. "This ends now. I will not allow children to be sacrificed while I sit safely in my castle." "Your Majesty," Thomas began, concern evident in his voice, "with the Queen so close to term—" "I am well aware of the timing," Alaric growled, "but I cannot ignore this. Prepare a royal contingent. I will lead them myself." "At least consult with the Queen before making a final decision," Thomas urged. "The bond you share gives her unique insight into these matters." Alaric nodded curtly, though his expression remained resolute. He found Seraphina in the nursery that had been prepared for their child, arranging small items with the care of an expectant mother. The room, once a symbol of their unfulfilled hopes, had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space. A carved wooden cradle stood at its center, crafted by the finest artisans in Lunaris and adorned with protective runes from both Therian and Soulkeeper traditions. Seraphina turned as Alaric entered, immediately sensing his troubled state through their bond. "What's happened?" she asked, one hand moving protectively to her belly. Alaric explained the latest reports from Captain Leander, watching as concern shadowed her features. "I must go," he concluded. "If children are being taken for sacrificial rituals, every day I delay puts more innocent lives at risk." To his surprise, Seraphina didn't immediately object. Through their bond, he felt not opposition, but a complex mix of emotions. Fear for his safety, yes, but also understanding of his duty, and most surprisingly, a sense of inevitability. "You've seen something," he realized, studying her face. "Through the Soulkeeper abilities." She nodded slowly. "Not a vision precisely, more a knowing. I've felt it growing stronger as the baby's arrival approaches. You must go to the Western Mountains, but not alone." "I'll take a full contingent of royal guards," Alaric assured her. "No," she said firmly. "I meant that I must go with you." Alaric stared at her in disbelief. "You can't be serious. You could give birth any day now." "That is precisely why I must go," Seraphina insisted. The child we carry is the key to something larger than either of us fully understand. I've felt it in dreams, in moments of deep connection through our bond. This confrontation with the Dark Council is not separate from our child's birth. They are somehow linked. All the more reason for you to remain safely in the castle, Alaric argued, protective instinct flaring. If the Dark Council seeks our child, why would we bring you closer to danger? Because some dangers cannot be avoided, only faced, Seraphina replied, her voice taking on the resonant quality that appeared when her soul keeper abilities were active. The ancient texts speak of moments when destiny cannot be diverted, only shaped by how we choose to meet it. Alaric wanted to dismiss her words as the understandable anxiety of an expectant mother, but the bond they shared made that impossible. Through their connection, he could feel the certainty behind her statement, not emotional, but almost prophetic. The Soul Keeper lineage included those with the ability to sense the threads of fate, to recognize pivotal moments before they occurred. Thomas will never agree to this, he said finally, a last attempt at dissuasion. Thomas already knows what I have sensed, Seraphina countered. He has seen the signs as clearly as I have. Ask him yourself if you doubt me. When confronted, the old advisor confirmed Seraphina's assertion. The Queen's instincts in this matter align with ancient prophecies concerning the union of Therian and Soul Keeper bloodlines, he explained. The texts speak of a child born at a moment of great peril, whose coming would either seal the barriers between worlds or shatter them forever. And you believe our child is this prophesied one? Alaric asked, skepticism evident in his voice, despite the evidence of magic he had witnessed throughout his life. I believe in being prepared for all possibilities, Thomas replied diplomatically. If the Queen's instincts tell her she must be present for this confrontation, I would not dismiss such guidance lightly. After much debate and careful planning, a compromise was reached. Alaric would lead a small but elite force to the Western Mountains, including Captain Leander and his most trusted guards. Seraphina would accompany them, but remain at a secure location away from any direct confrontation. Thomas would stay with her, along with the royal physician and 2 midwives, prepared for the possibility that the child might choose this inopportune moment to enter the world. The journey to the Western Mountains was slow and cautious. Seraphina traveled in a specially designed carriage with enhanced suspension to minimize discomfort over the rough terrain. Alaric rode beside it, never straying from her side despite the practical advantages of scouting ahead. Their bond allowed him to monitor her condition constantly, alert for any sign that the baby might be coming. On the 7th day of travel, they reached a small hunting lodge that had been secured as their base of operations. Nestled in a protected valley with good visibility of the surrounding approaches, the lodge offered both security and comfort for the heavily pregnant queen. Captain Leander reports activity at the largest ritual site, Thomas informed them as they settled into the lodge. Robed figures have been gathering since sundown, more than previously observed. How far is the site from here? Alaric asked, studying the map spread on the table before them. 3 hours' ride to the north, Thomas replied, in the shadow of Mount Erebus. Seraphina frowned, recognition flickering in her eyes. Mount Erebus appears in the ancient Soul Keeper texts. It was considered a place of power, a thin spot between worlds. A perfect location for those seeking to open a doorway, Alaric concluded grimly. We move tonight. I want to observe their activities before deciding how to proceed. As sunset approached, Alaric prepared to depart with a small scouting party. He found Seraphina on the lodge's covered porch, gazing northward toward where Mount Erebus rose against the darkening sky. Though the mountain itself was hidden by the surrounding forest, its presence seemed to exert a tangible pressure on the air. I'll return before midnight, Alaric promised, coming to stand beside her. Captain Leander's men will maintain a protective perimeter around the lodge. You'll be safe. It's not my safety that concerns me, Seraphina said, her eyes still fixed on the northern horizon. Something gathers there, Alaric, something ancient and patient that has waited centuries for this moment. A chill ran through Alaric at her words. Through their bond, he could feel the certainty behind them, along with something else, a strange resonance, as if their unborn child responded to the proximity of Mount Erebus. All the more reason to discover what the Dark Council plans, he said, forcing confidence into his voice. Knowledge is our best defense. Seraphina turned to him then, taking his face between her hands. Be cautious, my love. What waits on that mountain is not like Ravenna. She was merely an instrument. What gathers now are the architects themselves. Alaric covered her hands with his, drawing strength from their connection. I will observe only. At the first sign of real danger, I'll return. As he mounted his horse and rode out with Captain Leander and 5 elite guards, Alaric felt the bond with Seraphina stretch, but hold strong. Even at a distance, he could sense her presence, a beacon of light and warmth in his consciousness. More troubling was the increased awareness of their unborn child, whose consciousness seemed more active than usual, responding to something in their surroundings. The ride to Mount Erebus was tense and silent. As they drew closer, Alaric's enhanced Therian senses detected a wrongness in the forest around them. Birds had gone silent, and small animals fled their approach with unusual terror. The very air seemed to thicken, making breathing slightly labored. "Dismount here," Alaric ordered, when they reached a ridge overlooking a massive clearing at the base of Mount Erebus. "We'll approach on foot to reduce the chance of detection." Leaving the horses secured, they crept forward through the underbrush until they reached a vantage point with a clear view of the ritual site below. What they saw froze the blood in Alaric's veins. A vast circle had been cleared in the forest, at least 100 yards across. At its center stood a stone altar, ancient and weathered, its surface stained dark with what could only be centuries of blood sacrifices. Surrounding the altar in concentric circles were robed figures, at least 50 of them, their faces hidden within deep hoods. Most disturbing were the 7 small forms laid out in a star pattern around the altar, children, bound and unconscious but clearly alive. Their small chests rose and fell with shallow breaths, visible even from Alaric's distant position. "The missing children," Captain Leander whispered, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. 7 of them. 7 for the 7 gates, a cultured voice said from behind them. "How convenient that you've arrived to witness the culmination of our work." Alaric and his men whirled to find themselves surrounded by robed figures who had materialized from the forest with supernatural silence. At the forefront stood a tall, gaunt man with skin so pale it seemed almost translucent. Unlike the others, his hood was thrown back, revealing sharp features and eyes of such a deep black that they reflected no light. "I am Malachi," the man introduced himself with a small, mocking bow. "High Seer of the Dark Council, and you, King Alaric of Lunaris, are an unexpected complication in tonight's proceedings." Alaric's body began to shift instantly, responding to the threat. His hands elongated into claws, and his teeth sharpened to fangs. "Release the children," he growled, his voice deepening as the transformation progressed. Malachi seemed utterly unimpressed by the display. "I think not. Their innocent blood is required to weaken the barriers between worlds. A necessity, I'm afraid, though perhaps not for much longer." His black eyes studied Alaric with clinical interest. "Ravenna's experiment with you was crude but informative. The curse she placed upon you served its purpose in identifying a more elegant solution." "Enough talk!" Captain Leander snarled, drawing his sword. "Surrender now or face the consequences of your actions." Malachi sighed, as if genuinely disappointed by the captain's simplicity. "I had hoped for more enlightening conversation with the famous Wolf King, but very well. Guards, secure them." The robed figures moved with inhuman speed, producing weapons that glowed with the same sickly green energy that had marked Ravenna's magic. Alaric completed his transformation in an explosive surge of power, his magnificent silver-gray wolf form towering over the attackers. Captain Leander and his men formed a defensive circle, their trained movements speaking to years of disciplined combat. The battle erupted with ferocious intensity. Alaric tore through 3 attackers in as many seconds, their robes shredding under his claws to reveal not human bodies, but grotesque, chitinous forms beneath. Humanoid insects whose black blood hissed and steamed where it touched the ground. "Dark Council acolytes give up their humanity in service to the primal beast," Malachi explained conversationally, watching the fight from a safe distance. "A small price for immortality, wouldn't you agree?" Captain Leander fought with the skill of a lifetime soldier, his sword cleaving through the inhuman guards with precision. 2 of his men fell quickly, overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers, but the remaining 3 held their ground, fighting back to back. Alaric charged toward Malachi, recognizing him as the true threat. The High Seer merely smiled and raised one hand. Green fire erupted from his palm, striking Alaric in mid-leap and sending him crashing to the ground, his fur smoking from the impact. "Ravenna was powerful but undisciplined," Malachi commented, walking slowly toward the fallen king. "I, however, have had centuries to perfect my craft. Your bond with the Soul Keeper Queen is impressive, I admit, but it cannot protect you from what I command." Alaric struggled to rise, his body fighting against some invisible force that seemed to pin him to the forest floor. Through the bond, he felt Seraphina's alarm as she sensed his pain and danger. He tried to project reassurance back to her, to urge her to stay safely at the lodge, but the connection between them wavered under Malachi's influence. "I can feel your bond even now," the High Seer continued, circling Alaric's prone form. "Fascinating how it persists despite distance. Imagine my delight when our seers detected its formation 3 months ago, the merging of Therian and Soulkeeper bloodlines after so many centuries. And now, a child of both lineages grows within your queen." Alarm shot through Alaric as he realized the Dark Council's true target. "If you touch her," he snarled through elongated teeth, fighting against the magical restraint, "I will tear you apart piece by piece." "Such primitive threats," Malachi chuckled. "I have no intention of harming your queen or your child. Quite the contrary. They are far too valuable. The child especially represents a power the Dark Council has sought for generations, a living key to the gates between worlds." With a surge of desperate strength, Alaric broke free of the magical restraint, lunging at Malachi with jaws open to tear out his throat. The High Seer's eyes widened in momentary surprise before he twisted away with inhuman speed, though not fast enough to entirely avoid the attack. Alaric's claws raked across his face, tearing away a strip of the pale skin. But instead of blood, what poured from the wound was a black, oily substance that moved with apparent intelligence, flowing back to seal the injury even as Malachi stumbled backward. "Impressive," the High Seer acknowledged, his voice tight with the first hint of genuine emotion, pain mixed with grudging respect. "Your bond gives you strength beyond what Ravenna predicted. Unfortunately, I've already achieved my primary objective." He gestured toward the fighting behind them, where Captain Leander and his remaining men were being systematically overwhelmed. "Your brave captain and his guards have provided an excellent distraction, while my more capable associates pay a visit to your lovely queen." Horror flooded through Alaric as he realized he'd been manipulated. The entire confrontation had been designed to separate him from Seraphina, to draw him away from the lodge where she waited, vulnerable despite the guards left to protect her. Through their bond, he felt her sudden spike of fear, followed by a surge of protective determination. She was in danger. Real, immediate danger. With a roar of pure rage, Alaric charged not at Malachi, but through the circle of combatants, tearing a path toward his horse. Captain Leander, understanding instantly, shouted to his men, "Protect the king's retreat! For Lunaris!" The brave captain launched himself at Malachi, buying precious seconds for Alaric to break free of the ambush. 2 of the remaining royal guards followed, fighting desperately to clear a path back to the tethered horses. Malachi's voice rang out behind them, unnaturally loud in the forest. "Run, Wolf King! Run to your queen! But you'll find we've prepared a special welcome for the birth of your extraordinary child." Alaric reached his horse, shifting partially back to human form to mount the terrified animal. With a kick of his heels, he urged the beast to its fastest gallop, racing back toward the lodge with fear driving him beyond normal endurance. Through the bond, he could feel Seraphina's situation deteriorating. She was fighting, using her Soulkeeper abilities to defend herself, but she was also in labor. The child had chosen this worst possible moment to begin its entry into the world. The ride that had taken 3 hours on the approach seemed endless now, though Alaric pushed his mount to dangerous speeds through the dark forest. Twice they nearly fell as the horse's hooves caught on exposed roots, but somehow they maintained their headlong pace, driven by the pure desperation flowing through the bond. When Alaric finally burst into the clearing surrounding the lodge, the scene confirmed his worst fears. The building was surrounded by robed figures similar to those at the ritual site. The guards left to protect Seraphina lay scattered on the ground, some clearly dead, others moaning in agony from wounds that festered with unnatural corruption. From within the lodge came a woman's scream of pain, Seraphina, caught in the throes of childbirth while under attack. The sound tore through Alaric like a physical wound, spurring him to a full transformation as he leapt from his horse. He tore into the robed attackers with berserk fury, no longer fighting with strategy, but with pure instinct. Limbs went flying as his claws ripped through corrupted flesh. Heads separated from bodies as his jaws closed on throats and twisted. The silver-gray fur of his transformed state became matted with black ichor as he carved a path to the lodge doors. Inside, he found more bodies. The midwives who had accompanied them, their throats cut with surgical precision. Thomas lay crumpled against one wall, blood flowing from a head wound, but his chest still rising and falling with shallow breaths. And in the center of the main room, Seraphina struggled on a makeshift birthing bed, her face contorted with the pain of contractions. Standing over her was a woman in robes of midnight blue, rather than the black of the other attackers. Her hands glowed with green fire as she chanted in an ancient language, the words seeming to distort the very air around Seraphina's swollen belly. "Step away from my wife," Alaric growled, his transformed voice barely recognizable as human. The woman turned, revealing a face of unearthly beauty marked with symbols that crawled across her skin like living tattoos. "The Wolf King arrives," she said, her voice melodious despite the malevolence in her eyes, just in time to witness the birth of the key that will open the 7 gates. "Alaric," Seraphina gasped between contractions, her face pale with pain and exhaustion. "The baby comes. I can't hold it back." "You see?" The robed woman smiled. "Even now the child responds to our calling. It knows its purpose." "The only purpose my child will serve," Alaric snarled, advancing on the woman, "is as heir to the throne of Lunaris." The woman's smile widened. "Such limited ambition for one with royal blood. Your child is destined for so much more. Through its veins runs the combined power of Therian might and Soulkeeper magic, the perfect vessel to channel the primal beast into our world." Another contraction seized Seraphina, her scream cutting through the tension in the room. Through their bond, Alaric felt not just her physical pain, but her desperate struggle to protect their child from whatever magic the robed woman was attempting to work upon it. "Alaric," she called to him, her voice strained but determined. "The bond! Use the bond!" Understanding flowed between them without need for further explanation. Alaric charged forward, not toward the robed woman, but toward Seraphina. The woman raised her hands, green fire erupting toward him in a deadly stream, but he twisted in mid-leap, his Therian agility allowing him to avoid the worst of the blast. Landing beside the birthing bed, he placed one transformed hand on Seraphina's belly, while using the other to grip her outstretched palm. The bond between them flared to brilliant life, visible now as a silver cord connecting their hearts. Through that connection, Alaric channeled his strength directly to Seraphina, while she directed her Soulkeeper abilities to shield their unborn child from the Dark Council's influence. The robed woman screamed in fury, redoubling her magical assault. "You cannot protect it. The child's destiny was written before either of you were born." "Then we'll write a new destiny," Seraphina gasped, her free hand moving to cover Alaric's where it rested on her belly. Through their 3-point connection, something extraordinary happened. The bond expanded to encompass not just the two of them, but the child between them, creating a triangle of power that glowed with silver light. The robed woman stumbled back, shielding her eyes from the brilliance. "What is this? This is not in the prophecies." "Because your prophecies account only for power." Thomas's voice came weakly from where he had struggled to his knees, not for love, not for the willing sacrifice of parents for their child. Another contraction seized Seraphina, more powerful than any before. Through the bond, Alaric felt the child responding to their combined protection, its own nascent consciousness reaching for theirs with innocent trust. "It comes," Seraphina whispered, her face transforming from pain to wonder. "Our child comes now." The next moments passed in a blur of intensity. Alaric shifted back to human form to better assist with the birth, following Seraphina's urgent instructions. The robed woman continued her assault, but the shield created by their bonded connection held firm, repelling her magic. With a final push and a cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the lodge, Seraphina brought their child into the world. Alaric caught the infant in hands that trembled with emotion, cradling the tiny form with a gentleness that belied his warrior's strength. "A son," he breathed in wonder, looking down at the perfect face of their newborn. "We have a son." But something was wrong. The baby did not cry. His tiny chest did not move with breath. Though formed perfectly, with all fingers and toes accounted for, he lay still and silent in his father's hands. "No!" Serafina gasped, reaching for the infant. "Give him to me, quickly!" Alaric placed their son in her arms, terror clutching at his heart. Through the bond, he could feel Serafina gathering her soul-keeper abilities, focusing them with desperate intensity on the silent child. "Breathe," she commanded, her voice taking on the resonant quality of deep power. "Breathe, my son. Your father and I call you to life." The robed woman laughed, a sound of genuine delight. "It's too late. The child's spirit has already been claimed by the primal beast. Its body is but an empty vessel now, ready to receive a greater consciousness." "No!" Alaric roared, his eyes flashing amber as rage and grief threatened to overwhelm him. Through the bond, he poured his own life force into Serafina's efforts, offering everything he had to save their son. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. The baby remained still, his perfect face peaceful in death. Then, as if responding to the combined will of his parents, his chest expanded slightly. A tiny sound escaped his lips, not quite a cry, but a definite breath. "Again," Serafina urged, tears streaming down her face as she cradled him close. "Breathe again, little one. Come back to us." The second breath came stronger, followed by a third. And then, as if a dam had broken, the child drew in a mighty gulp of air and released it in a powerful cry that filled the lodge with its life-affirming sound. "No!" the robed woman shrieked, her composed demeanor shattering completely. "This cannot be. The primal beast had claimed him." "And we claimed him back," Alaric said, placing a protective hand on his son's head. "Through the bond that you and your Dark Council failed to understand, not just a connection of power, but of souls." The woman staggered backward, her face contorting with rage. The symbols on her skin began to writhe more violently, some detaching themselves to float in the air around her. "This is not over," she hissed. "The child still carries the potential. The Dark Council is patient. We have waited centuries. We can wait longer." Before Alaric could respond, the woman's body seemed to collapse in on itself, the symbols consuming her physical form until nothing remained but a swirl of arcane marks that dissipated into the air. "A projection," Thomas explained weakly, having dragged himself closer during the confrontation. "Her physical body remains at Mount Erebus with the others. What we saw was merely an extension of her consciousness." Alaric barely heard him, his attention fixed on Serafina and their newborn son, who now nursed contentedly at his mother's breast, as if the struggle for his very soul had never occurred. Through the bond, Alaric could feel the child's presence more clearly now, bright, curious, and undeniably whole. Whatever influence the Dark Council had attempted to exert had been broken by the combined power of his parents' bond. "He needs a name," Serafina said softly, stroking the fine silver-white hair that covered the baby's head. A perfect blend of Alaric's silver wolf coloring and Serafina's golden tones. "Rowan," Alaric suggested, recalling an ancient Therian name that symbolized protection and strength. "Rowan Stone, Prince of Lunaris." Serafina smiled, exhausted but radiant with maternal joy. "Rowan," she repeated, testing the name. Through the bond, they felt the child respond to the sound, his consciousness brightening at this first gift from his parents. Captain Leander arrived shortly after, bloodied but alive, having fought his way free of the ambush at Mount Erebus. The bodies of the Dark Council acolytes lay where they had fallen, though several had dissolved into a black, oily substance. "The ritual site?" Alaric questioned as the captain knelt before him, offering formal congratulations on the birth of his son. "Abandoned, Your Majesty. When the woman's projection was destroyed, the remaining members fled. We managed to free the children. They are shaken but unharmed." Relief flowed through Alaric at this news. "And Malachi?" "Escaped," Captain Leander admitted grimly. "Along with several of the higher-ranking council members. They used some form of magic to vanish into the shadows." Thomas, his head wound bandaged by one of the surviving guards, nodded solemnly. "They will regroup. The Dark Council has existed for centuries, suffering setbacks but never truly defeated. Tonight was a significant blow to their plans, but not a final one." "Then we must be prepared for their return," Alaric said, his gaze returning to Serafina and their son. "Not just for our sake, but for Rowan's. The Dark Council will not forget what they believe him to be." "The key to the 7 gates," Seraphina murmured, "a living bridge between worlds." "Whatever power he holds," Alaric said firmly, "it will be his to command when he is ready, not theirs to exploit. Until then, we protect him with everything we have." 3 days later, they returned to Lunaris Castle in triumph, bringing with them the rescued children. The people lined the streets to cheer their king and queen, but most especially to catch a glimpse of the silver-haired prince born amidst such extraordinary circumstances. Bells rang from every tower, and flowers rained down on the royal procession as they made their way through the capital. For the common folk, Prince Rowan represented more than just a royal heir. He was a symbol of Lunaris's rebirth, of balance restored after decades of slow corruption. In the privacy of the royal chambers, Alaric watched as Seraphina placed their sleeping son in the carved cradle that had waited so long to be filled. Through their bond, he could feel her contentment, her profound joy at finally having the child they had both wanted for 7 long years. "He will face challenges we cannot imagine," she said softly, trailing her fingers through Rowan's silver-white hair. "The Dark Council will not abandon their plans for him, and he will meet those challenges with strength inherited from both of us," Alaric replied, coming to stand beside her. "Not just our abilities, but our values, our love." Seraphina leaned into his embrace, the bond between them flowing with peaceful certainty. "I never believed, during those 7 years of distance, that we would find this happiness," she admitted. "That the curse that kept you from me would one day lead to such a perfect balance." "Not perfect," Alaric corrected gently. "Balanced, light and dark, creation and protection, Soulkeeper and Therian. 2 halves of a whole that neither of us could be alone." From the cradle, baby Rowan stirred, his tiny face scrunching momentarily before relaxing back into peaceful sleep. Through the bond, both parents felt the brush of his developing consciousness against theirs, curious, loving, and undeniably powerful even in infancy. Outside the castle windows, Lunaris spread before them, a kingdom healing from decades of subtle corruption. In the distance, beyond the western mountains where the Dark Council had retreated, storm clouds gathered. But that was a battle for another day. For now, the soul of the Wolf King had found its true purpose, not in power or dominion, but in the protection of the family and kingdom he loved beyond measure.